Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacy Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hey there, everybody. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. Does that feel weird to you, Andy, saying that 2026?
Yeah, honestly, at this point, like, they're just big numbers to me. I think we're supposed to have like hover boards and all kinds of stuff by now, and they just sound like they're all made up. I don't know.
I was actually just having a conversation the other day with my husband about when, like, I feel like we're getting closer and closer to Jetsons, like the Jetsons era. And I was like, oh my gosh, 2026. I mean, it feels like we're at that stage, right? Where it's such a large number. And I think about, I don't know about for any of our listeners who may be like middle-aged or older, like when you start to have to scroll down those selection menus and click your little age, and you have to go down a ways now. It's a little depressing.
Yeah, they like bucket them, right? Like, and when you go into the next little bucket, you're like, oh man, I used to be in the other bucket.
Yeah. Oh, it's wild. Anyway, so that was obviously a sidebar, but we are so glad to have you here in this new year with us, listening to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Andy and I have enjoyed doing this podcast for, probably about 6 years plus at this point. And what makes this happen are your questions. And so you are about to listen to an episode that has some great questions that we dug into. But again, this is our call to action to you. Your New Year's resolution, although many of you probably roll your eyes because a lot of people hate New Year's resolutions, but it's your New Year's resolution to send us at least one question this year and share this with one person this year. So with that, I will turn it over to the fabulous co-host to kind of kick us off today. So let's get started. Our organization has a $1 million annual budget, and we are looking to make significant budget cuts since the first 6 months of the fiscal year haven't gone as projected. I serve as the treasurer and am wondering how best to go about working with the ED and Finance Committee to amend the budget. At our last Finance Committee meeting, we started to look at individual line items that could be cut. And I'm wondering if that is the best way to do this. Is it a better idea instead to provide the executive director with a dollar amount or percent of the budget that needs to be cut and have him figure out the details before presenting a reforecasted budget to us? What would you suggest? We want this to be a productive process, and I'm not sure from a board role and finance committee role what the best way is to go about this.
First of all, I'd say thank you for asking the question, because usually we don't hear the board asking. We hear the board telling you what you need to do. And the fact that you're like open to suggestions is really good. That's a good sign for your organization to begin with. You're not the only one in this particular boat, since the federal government has decided to just stop sending money for certain programs for no reason other than it causes chaos. So there are lots of organizations that this is applying to right now. So you're for sure not alone. I'm going to describe two scenarios. So one is like what you should do now, like okay, it happened. Now what? Right? That's scenario one.
Right.
The second scenario, it's actually I'm going to describe first, is what should have happened or what you can set up for the future so that if this does happen again, you know how to solve it without having to have it be a problem. So we'll go back a little bit and talk about what the difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is, because that's kind of where it all starts. So the purpose of a for-profit is to tell investors that when they're giving money to this thing, that they're going to get more money back. So it's when we talk about how to sort of explain what the money is, we're talking about we're going to do something that generates money. So by selling coffee, we know that we can buy coffee for $1 a pound and we can sell it for $20 a pound. And therein lies the profit that we'll then pay the investors back with. If things aren't looking good and you don't have a whole bunch of customers, what you get to do is you get to say, well, we're just going to buy less coffee. So you can sort of, as you see the demand start to decrease, you can sort of you can make your expenses lowered because the demand is lower. So you don't actually have to have as much stuff to be able to sell people. So those two things kind of work at the same direction. So if demand goes up, then your supply goes up. Those two things go up. If demand goes down, you can sort of push your expenses down and it's not a big deal. The investors might get paid less money, but it doesn't break the system. In the nonprofit world, supply and demand are not connected at all. So the supply, so when we're talking about the revenue that's coming into your organization, is coming in from donors, the federal government, state governments, individuals, foundations. That's where the money comes from. And then what you're spending the money on is not connected to that generally at all. So if the donors stop giving you money, that doesn't change what you're going to spend it on at all. It stays the same. And so that the connection between the revenue and the expenses is totally broken. It's totally disconnected because in reality, the demand is infinite. There's no way, like if you had all the money in the world, you might be able to like solve the one specific challenge that you're working on, but that's never reality. Instead, you say, so the way we look at it in the nonprofit sector is starting with the revenue. How much money do we have coming in? What does that mean we can do in terms of the mission that we're doing in the community? So what needs to happen when you're creating your budget to begin with is to start with the revenue side. And this is the 100% opposite of the way 95% of organizations do it, is they start with the expenses because that's the typical business way to do it, is to say, we need to find out how much we're going to spend. And then that'll modify, if the revenue doesn't come in the same, we just change the expenses and we're good. But because that doesn't work, we have to start with the revenue side. So we have to say what money is coming in, and then how does that turn into units of mission that we're going to be able to do? And that usually starts with your strategic plan. You say, we're going to do this many things. It's contingent on this much money coming in. And because that's where the connection is the money and the output, expenses are just something that happens at the end. You have to spend a certain amount of money if you're going to do the units of mission that you say you are based on the revenue that comes in. So if the revenue that comes in is lower, you don't need to worry about what expenses are going to change because that revenue shouldn't change the expenses. The revenue should change the output. It should change the metrics that are in your strategic plan. So if you said you were going to feed 100,000 people and you only received half as much money, you're going to feed 50,000 people. So that's what changes. And then the rest of it just sort of flows. The expenses flow based on the new strategic plan metric. So in the question, we get, I have a budget, the money doesn't come in. What do we do about expenses? You're missing the most important part. The most important part is, what are we going to do about helping the people in the community with the money that we have available? And how does that best get deployed? So that's not a finance committee question. That's a staff question. So you say to the staff, look, these grants didn't show up. What does that mean? Like in reality, what does that grant not showing up mean in terms of what we were going to distribute to the community in terms of mission? And they will tell you, they will say, if this grant doesn't come in, that was connected to these things, so we can't do this program. This program is now dead. And maybe the people that are along with the program, but if we budgeted that program, those people as part of that grant, maybe those people don't have jobs anymore. Right? Because we set it up that way that as soon as the grant goes away, the program goes away, so that people have to go away too, which sucks. We'll just say it's a terrible way to manage people. But if that's the way you set it up, that has to be what the answer is. So instead of looking at how do we reforecast? How do we change our expenses? We need to be looking at how does the mission change based on our new revenue reality? And then that's the answer. That's just what comes out of it. So the board needs to be like, okay, we recognize the revenue isn't coming in the way we want it to come in. How are we changing the goals and the activities that are in the strategic plan that we told you needed to do? How are we going to modify those so that you can hit the targets based on this new revenue goal? Does that make sense?
So, yes. And I appreciate that distinction. And I have some follow-up questions that I also think are tied into this question. So that feels very clear cut if we're talking about output and program output. Yep. But let's also be candid that what is a tendency to have happen is to look at the things that are, quote, not, the direct versus indirect expenses, and to look at things like, oh, we had whatever, there's a leadership conference. Oh, we have marketing and social media planned for the organization. Oh, we have staff salary increases, like whatever. Like those are the things that my fear is what happens is I think most organizations look at, and staff are already like in the nonprofit sector generally at the very low end of all those things, if they're even like the majority of organizations. And now we're saying, let's cut that even further. So let's keep our programs and services intact so we can have the same output, so we can have the same, so when we go and apply for those grants, we can still be competitive because we still have all the numbers there to show we didn't have a down year. But then let's put this on the backs of the people who work for us. And so how do you navigate that, Andy?
Oh, it's even worse than that, because I mean, when you receive restricted funds, if you have grant funds, God forbid you have federal grant funds, they have all these additional restrictions that you have to comply with on top of what you're supposed to do. So if they gave you it, so say you get 2 federal grants, one of them goes away and one of them stays. The federal grant that stayed may have something in it already for staff training that's scheduled, but now you only have half the money because the other federal grant went away. So then what do? You can't send half a person to a conference.
No.
But if you don't send anybody to the conference, you don't get that money from the federal government because it's already earmarked for that exact task. So it's an incredibly difficult layer cake of restrictions, and which is why the answer doesn't come from the top. The answer comes from the bottom. The answer comes from the line staff that are doing the work and their managers who know this is what it costs to do the program. And these are all of the things that we need to have baked into this, including things like staff salary increases, conferences, training. Those are all the things that have to go in to be able to do this program. Number one, because we won't get reimbursed for it if we don't do it. And is that okay? Like, we're already looking at a cash crunch. Do you want to see it be even worse? Because so we don't go to the conference, but then we don't get reimbursed for going to the conference, so we didn't save anything, right? It's basically net zero for not going. So you have to take all that into consideration as well. But the bottom level of your staff is going to know, like, we will tell you, like, if this grant goes away and this grant goes away and we only have this much money left, this is how many people we can serve. This is the chunk of mission that you've told us that we can do, that we will be able to do based on what the new revenue situation is, right? So you have to listen to the people at the bottom of the pyramid, and they may tell you, like, okay, we realize that we've got salary increases baked in, and we're willing to forego the salary increase because it will mean X, right? That's a possibility as well.
Okay, so what happens then, Andy, with, let's say it's totally not tied and wrapped into a grant. It is just, You have your annual operating budget, you say professional development, leadership development, pay equity, whatever, these things, an office space like that is nice and in a safe, secure part of, the whatever town, whatever that looks like you have that. So where does that, because this is where I keep thinking, I hear what you're saying, but I'm also thinking about the realities of, that's the first thing that I feel like, knowing the boards I've worked with, that the first thing they do is look at that and go, well, none of that this year. And first of all, I just want to put this caveat, and I want to have you react to this too. I don't think a board should be deciding any of that. I think if there's financial issues, I think a board should say, hey, you need to restructure, reforecast some of what you just said, Andy, and come back to us, versus the board getting in, figuring out what stays, what goes, line item by line item. And
right.
Sadly, but for an organization that's $1 million organization, that's a smaller organization. And I'm sitting there going, and that's where boards start to meddle. And that's because boards understand that, because that's their day. I mean, they understand the management of a budget, because probably this treasurer does that for their livelihood. So the 2 layers I'm trying to figure out are the when it's separate from a grant or funding source. And maybe you're telling me it's one and the same, and it's still, I know it's, and then how do you deal with the board? At what point is it too far for the board to get into the business of this budget and needing to reforecast?
Well, I mean, it comes down to the question of why you're reforecasting and what the point of the reforecast is. So one of the things that I used to fight, and I lost almost every time, is something would change throughout the year. The government would get shut down, and so there'd be extra need, and so we'd have to spend a bunch of extra money to be able to solve a particular challenge we didn't notice, which meant that we were going to come in under our budget in terms of. We were going to spend more money than we thought we were going to spend, and maybe we raised a tiny bit more, right? But there's a delta. And so the board would come back and say, can you modify your budget based on this? And my answer was always like, to what purpose? Like the point of a budget is to say, this is the revenue that's coming in. This is the output that we're required to do as a nonprofit. This is what we're going to do with that money that we have. And the expenses just fall out of the equation. That's how much it costs to do it. If one of those things changes, what that's supposed to give us is information to be able to make that process better next year. It's not the win is serving the mission. The win is not balancing the budget. Like those are two totally separate things. And it's okay within an organization to totally miss the budget, either high or low. Like it just says that, okay, maybe it tells you there's something that we did wrong during this process that we didn't catch. What is it? Was it malfeasance? Did somebody do something stupid? Do they not know how their calculator works? Like, what's the issue and how do we address that? Or was there some external factor that we didn't know about, COVID-19, or grandma died and gave us $3 million that we weren't expecting, and so we're going to be way off on our target this year? Like, for me, it's always been okay to be off. Our dream is to try to make it as close as possible because we want to deploy the resources in the most effective way that we can. And the plan is supposed to describe that, deploying resources in the most effective way possible. So if we're off plan, it means we were less effective. But being off plan isn't like the point. Like that's not like bouncing the budget isn't the point of the nonprofit. The point of the nonprofit is to deliver units of mission to your community. So that's why, I mean, I see in a situation where it's really small and there may not be a finance person who's as feisty as me, like chirping back at the board saying, you're missing the point. Like the point is, because I can get people to, they're angry at me at the end of it, but I can get them to understand we have to stop, take a step back and explain why we're here. And if the reason we're here is to balance a budget, I don't think you understand the point. I think the point is supposed to be, how are we serving the community while continuing to like make this organization a place where people don't just quit left and right because it's miserable. I mean, we have a lot of things that we need to balance, and your expectations of how a nonprofit works is one of those things that I need to balance. So you need to decide how important that is in the grand scheme of things, right? Board members do not like that conversation, just so you know. No. But so like when reality hits and we need to make a change from base difference from what is planned, Andy's opinion always, whether or not you're thinking about it the right way from the begin with, or you have to sort of back into this explanation, is that we need to talk about what we're doing in the community and less about what the expenses are, because it's okay to have a deficit. It's okay to have a surplus. It's okay to balance exactly. I'm freaked out when we balance exactly because it means something weird happened. That's the unlikeliest scenario is when you balance exactly. So I don't know why I would spend a lot of attention on trying to make that thing happen. I'm more interested in, hey, we got a federal grant, which has all these weird restrictions on it. How do I make sure that I get every penny out of this grant? Like, what do I need to do to make sure that I've sucked the federal government dry on this particular grant and I don't leave anything left in the coffers for them to do crazy things with someplace else? Like, I want to be able to use all the money they allocated to our mission and not something else, right? Making sure that our regular donors that aren't the federal government are happy with the way that their money's being deployed, that they're seeing that that's being done in a really smart, effective way. Like those, as a finance person, that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in making two numbers match. That's less, that's more accounting than it is finance.
So tell me if I may be pushing this point too far, but what I'm trying to also think about with this question is everything you said makes a lot of sense and works well if you have as you said, a designated finance or someone who is a respected, designated finance person.
Right.
$1 million organization. Let's hypothetically say they don't have that.
Right.
So
they don't.
how do they protect, right? How do they protect those line items that are going to be the first to be sliced when that's all the stuff that like is considered, because maybe it's not wrapped into their program budget, right? Maybe it's very like, this is the overhead, right? And here's the program stuff. And like, so how do you deal with that? So like marketing doesn't go away. So staff doesn't staff can, maybe they even, I don't know, staff doesn't get a bonus. Like, how do you protect that when you're in that situation?
So I think it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard because because it sounds like in this scenario, we've got board members that are concerned about net present value and nothing else. So what we would need to do in that scenario is like calculate what net present value of these decisions is. If we fire the marketing team, a very common example is, the second year after doing an acquisition direct mail campaign, somebody goes, oh my gosh, look how much money we spent. And we got nothing back. We got like $200 and we spent $10,000. Like, how did that happen? Let's get rid of this whole program. And then you have to have a conversation with, well, this is how acquisition campaigns work, that you see them start to blossom over 5 years. Like it's a long runway, but you have to invest in that runway to make it work. So those are the conversations you have to have about everything, about whether or not staff is retained. Because one of the things, like you can't, I mean, I've lost this argument a lot of times. It's like, yeah, this person needs to be paid more than we're willing to pay them. So what do we do? Like if we say, sorry, they're going to leave, and then I have to hire somebody new who doesn't know anything, there's the possibility that I get somebody better, but that's a risk. And then we have to like figure out how much is the risk worth to make this person unhappy and have to find somebody new. That's going to turn into dollars, and potentially you could figure out how many dollars. I don't know that that's a useful exercise for a finance person, but if that's the only language they speak, I think maybe explaining it using those terms might be helpful, is to say, look, this is, and one of the things we've talked about before is talking about things like having a reserve. Like if it's sometimes it's difficult to convince a board to raise more money than they spend. And we talk about that extra money, that surplus, is being problematic because the board wants you to burn the surplus so you can do more mission. And the reason you leave the surplus is you have to say, well, this is our investment fund. This is the pool of money that we need to keep in place, because if we find something that's going to be a really quick win, it's really hard to raise money fast. So having this money here able to be deployed on something that's interesting is a good reason to have this surplus. So it's kind of similar to that conversation where you're talking about, the reason we're going to do this marketing stuff is because if we don't, then next year or the year after that, people are going to not know who we are. And it's going to be even harder to raise money. We're going to end up, it's the death spiral of spending less until nobody knows who we are. We don't have any money to hire anybody, and the organization just dries up and blows away. Is that what you want now? Like, because we can try to burn through all of these other things, which are investments, to try to get us through the situation that we're in right now. But does that help us 2 years, 3 years down the line? That's a board decision for sure, is to say, here's where we are. We need these things for future reasons. Is that okay to keep? And then maybe they can make it help. But I still like deeply feel that that's a staff decision to say, here's what we're proposing and here's why, and being able to defend it. And then the board gets to say yes or no. The board, I mean, in a very small organization that's only got $1 million in revenue, the board probably is used to having their fingers in more pies. So it might be even harder for that one. But if you've got the fact that somebody's asking this question makes me feel good that maybe they can start to look at it with a slightly different lens, of an investment lens instead of a expenses lens, which is the way I like to look at it. And maybe they can be the person that's sort of supporting the investment pitch that the staff should be making in a reasonably large organization or a bigger organization instead of this specific one. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, no, I think it's super helpful. I feel like we need to send this particular podcast episode to every nonprofit finance committee board out there, because I truly don't think it's that anyone is trying to be, they don't they're not thinking of it in the way that you are presenting it. And that is why there needs to be someone internally who can make the case, but who they also have, they have to have trust in. I mean, you were a CFO of a major, a larger organization. And so I want to figure out, how do we get how do we get people with your brains and your it's not even a philosophy, but it's an approach to it, that serve on finance
lifestyle.
Committees. Yeah, it's a lifestyle, right? But you're right. To your point, I love that it was a treasurer who asked this question. Yeah. And I love that the treasurer even was even though it sounds like the answer is no, no, and no, it's not as simple as okay, we're just going to go across the board and cut 10% off everything, or we're going to have a percent or dollar figure to try to move it down. Because the other piece here that I think I also hear you talking about is the idea that it's not just output changing, but also where are we talking about revenue? Where are we talking about the other side of this machine to say, what are the upcoming revenue opportunities? Hey, board, this is now a time more than ever that you really need to step up and step in, right? Because there's the piece is everyone goes to cut when nonprofits are already working on bare bones. And it's absolutely makes it 100 times worse.
And part of the reason is, I kind of want to let the boards off the hook a little bit, because it feels like I don't want it to sound like they don't get it, because the reality is they're totally steeped in the for-profit mindset of we're worried about demand and we're worried about expenses. So those demand and expenses are the key things that they're worried about. We've talked about this before, the typical set of financial statements is all about demand and expenses. That's what that's for. For a nonprofit, that, all of that is totally immaterial because they're not connected, like I said from the beginning. And it's a completely different mindset change when you think that the one thing that we need to be the most concerned about is, just like you said, is the revenue side of the equation. That is the key driver to everything. Nothing happens unless the revenue side of the equation is really, really, really well thought out. Anybody can spend money. Anybody can do good. What we really need to be good at is connecting with donors, connecting with funders to make them understand that of all of the people that you could hand a check to, we're the ones that have this figured out. And so that's where all of the focus needs to be. And boards just don't, they're not told that. Even me, and I'm not quiet. And I know I've been around for a while, and it was very difficult having this conversation with a board, even at a big organization, when I did have a little bit of clout. Because it's just completely opposite of what they've been trained their entire life. The only reason they're on a board is because they're good at this other thing. And now we've put them on something and told them, oh, by the way, the sky is purple. And they're like, no, it isn't. My whole career, the sky has been blue. And so it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to get to. I certainly haven't figured out how to get people to get it. Maybe one day. Thanks for joining us. Stacy and I are appreciative that you've taken time out of your busy day to listen to us babble about nonprofit topics. Again, questions at nonprofiteverything.com is the email, or find us at nonprofiteverything on pretty much all of some of the socials. And we'll get those questions answered. We really appreciate you. Thanks for doing what you do. Stacy and I wouldn't get to hang out with each other if you guys weren't doing what you do. So thanks a lot.